Hi, in this video we're going to be going over lesson 8.2, comparing and rounding decimals. We're going to start by using a place value chart to help us compare and order three decimals so that we can order them from least to greatest. So we're going to start by filling in our place value chart. So our first decimal is 835 thousandths, and so we have 0 ones, 8 tenths, 3 hundredths, and 5 thousandths. Next we have 2 and 641 thousandths. We have 2 ones, 6 tenths, 4 hundredths, and 1 thousandth. Finally, we have 329 thousandths. We have 0 ones, 3 tenths, 2 hundredths, and 9 thousandths. Now to start, we're going to look at our largest place value and compare those. So we're going to look at our ones place. Now only one of our numbers has a value in the ones place. So that means when we compare the ones, 2 and 641 thousandths would be our largest number. So now we just need to compare 835 thousandths to 329 thousandths. So what we're going to do next is take a look at the next largest place value, which would be our tenths place. So when we're comparing our digits in our tenths place, 835 thousandths has an 8 in the tenths place, whereas 329 thousandths has a 3 in the tenths place. 8 is greater than 3, which tells us that 835 thousandths would be greater than 329 thousandths. So now we can go and order our numbers from least to greatest. What we just determined was that 329 thousandths was our smallest number, so that would go first since we're ordering from least to greatest. Then 835 thousandths would come next, and finally 2 and 641 thousandths would come last. We're going to use the same process that we used in the last example to help us order these three numbers from greatest to least. It's very important that when you're reading the problem, you read carefully to tell whether you're trying to order them from least to greatest or greatest to least. So we'll start by filling out our place value chart. We have 72 hundredths. So we have a 0 in the ones place, a 7 in the tenths place, a 2 in the hundredths place, and it doesn't go to the thousandths place, which would mean that we could technically put a 0 in the thousandths place. Next we have 273 thousandths. So again we have a 0 in the ones place, a 2 in the tenths place, a 7 in the hundredths place, and a 3 in the thousandths place. And finally we have 7 tenths. So we have a 0 in the ones place and a 7 in the tenths place. Now again, since we only go to the tenths place, any smaller place value we could represent by putting a 0, just so that we know that we don't have anything in that place. So we're going to start by comparing the largest place value, which is our ones place. Since all three numbers have a 0 in the ones place, that means that we need to move to the next largest place value, which would be the tenths place. So we look at our digits in the tenths place. We have a 7, a 2, and a 7. So we can figure out what the smallest number would be. That would be 273 thousandths, because 2 is less than 7. But because we have two 7s in the tenths place, that means that we need to then move to the hundredths place. So if we take a look at the hundredths place, we have a 2 and a 0. 2 is greater than 0, which means that 72 hundredths would be greater than 7 tenths. So when we go and write our list of our numbers from greatest to least, we determined that our greatest number was 72 hundredths. So that would come first. Then 7/10 came next. And finally, our smallest number was 273 thousandths. The next skill that we're going to introduce is rounding decimals to the nearest hundredth. So in this chapter, the only digit that we're going to be rounding to is the hundredths place. And so rounding to the hundredths place is the same thing as rounding to 2 digits to the right of the decimal place. Now if we think back to when we did rounding at the beginning of the year with place value, we had a little rhyme that we used to help us. And so we're going to review what that rhyme is as it applies to rounding to the nearest hundredth. So we're going to circle the rounding digit and look next door. 5 or higher, add 1 more. 4 or lower, just ignore. 2 digits past the decimal point is all you keep. The rest of the digits will go to sleep. So we're going to use this rhyme to help us as we round 3 decimals. So our first decimal is 14 thousandths, and we need to round that to the nearest hundredth. So using our rhyme, we need to circle the rounding digit. Our rounding digit is 1 because the 1 is in the hundredths place, and that's the place that we are rounding to. Then we're going to look next door, which means looking to the right. 5 or higher, we add 1 more, and 4 or lower, we just ignore. Because it's a 4 next door, we're going to just ignore. So that means that we're going to keep the 1 a 1. Because 2 digits past the decimal point is all we're going to keep, that means that 14 thousandths rounded to the nearest hundredth, keep the 0, our decimal point, our first digit, and our second digit. So 14 thousandths would round to 1/100th. For the next example, we have 2 and 345 thousandths. So we're going to start by circling the rounding digit, which is a 4 this time, because the 4 is in the hundredths place. We're going to look next door. It's a 5. When it's 5 or higher, we add 1 more, which means that our 4 is going to move up to a 5. So to write our rounded number, we keep the 2 and the 3 the same, and the 4 is going to round up to a 5. And because we only keep 2 digits past the decimal point, our rounded answer would be 2 and 35 hundredths. For our final example, we have 5 and 997 thousandths, and we're trying to round that to the nearest hundredth. So we're going to circle our rounding digit. We have a 9 in the hundredths place this time. We're going to look next door. We have a 7. A 7 is 5 or higher, which means we need to add 1 more. Now it gets tricky this time, because if we were to add 1 more, since we're at 9, that means that we need to regroup. And so if we regroup, we would have to add 1 more to the tens place. But since we have a 9 in the tens place, if we were to add 1 more to the tens place, we'd have to regroup again into the ones place. So in this case, in order to add 1 more, we'd have to go all the way to the ones place and add 1 more there. So the 5 would become a 6. and 5 and 997 thousandths would round to 6 as the nearest hundredth.